Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. We are presented by Rally House on this Wednesday. Great to have you with us. I'm Dave Revson, and I'm pleased to be joined by Ashley Adamson. Ashley, been looking forward to this week. We get Big Ten on Big Ten in all of our games. With all due respect to the Sun Belt and the MAC, we don't have to do any more deep dives into those teams. We just focus on the 18 teams that we know the best. Can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited. The first full week of conference play is always one of the things that I look forward to. And Dave, it's always great to be with you. This is like the best hour of my week, quickly becoming the best hour of my week.
This does not say much for your week, but I am thrilled that we are together and that it already has made that big an impact on you. We'll have fun in the green room on Saturday, too. I mean, you know, this won't be our only hurrah this week. We look at our big story, and it's the big board giving us the best look at it. 8-game weekend, Big Ten versus Big Ten. Starts Friday night with Washington and Rutgers. Good one early Saturday here on the network. Unbeaten Indiana hosting Maryland. Little brown jug going on at that time as well. Other games include Ohio State going to East Lansing, Oregon's first Big Ten game against a familiar foe in UCLA, and one battle of ranked teams in State College. Number 19 Illinois visiting 9th-ranked Penn State, and James Franklin urging the Nittany Lion fans to treat this one in the same way they would treat the very biggest games, urging the fan base to bring whiteout energy while not specifically calling for a whiteout. They've already scheduled the whiteout game for Washington November the 9th. Brett Bielema responded by saying they're calling for whiteout energy, whatever the H-E double hockey sticks that means. I'm not sure where the FCC falls on that word. And Ashley, frankly, I got to get the girls through college, and then I'll go full George Carlin on you. But anyway, we get the point there. Bielema maybe saying I'm not sure what James is getting at there. James essentially saying, hey, let's bring all the energy we can bring, irrespective of what everyone's going to be wearing. What do you make of kind of the excitement surrounding this game?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the Penn State fans are going to need to bring some energy because remember the last time that these two teams met in Happy Valley, it was the longest game in the history of college football. So
it just ended, Ashley. It just ended last week.
Saturday night, yeah, I think it just wrapped up. But yeah, I think I'm excited about this one. I mean, you start with Illinois. There are plenty of teams around the country that we don't know enough about because they might be undefeated, but they still haven't really played anybody. Illinois has been tested, and I understand that the two ranked teams that they've beat in Kansas and Nebraska are not ranked currently, but that does not take away from the experience that you gain when you play in those big-time environments against very good teams and you find a way to win. And particularly, I think about that overtime win in Lincoln. It just showed a lot to me, and that win obviously makes this weekend's game against Penn State even bigger. And Dave, my thought on Penn State at this point is that Andy Kotelnicki's offense is just fun to watch. They blew the top off an overmatched Kent State team last week. And beyond the 718 yards of offense, the stat that stood out to me was that 8 different guys scored a touchdown, like 8 different guys in the end zone. And even in a blowout where you have different guys in who don't usually play, that just doesn't happen. So I think that's almost, you could call that like a microcosm of Kotelnicki's approach. He mixes it up really well. He uses different motion and shifts, and the next thing you know, a tight end is throwing a touchdown pass. So it's been fun to see how he keeps the defense on its heels, and I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like Saturday with the whiteout energy against the best defense that they've faced.
I'm glad you brought up Kotelnicki because to me that's where it's really interesting too. You know, Aaron Henry, the defensive coordinator for Illinois, talked a lot after that Kansas game about the fact that he had watched the film from that Kansas game last year 100 times. That's what he told us. And he didn't feel great for good reason about what Kansas did to them last year, 539 yards of offense. And obviously Illinois got its revenge. But to me, the story was not so much about Kansas. I mean, again, I understand it was the same uniforms, but the offensive coordinator in that Kansas game last year was Andy Kotelnicki. So I think the real measuring stick now for Aaron Henry and for Illinois and for how much better are you truly on defense was not that Kansas game. The measuring stick is how do you do against Andy Kotelnicki? Are you able to adjust to all of the different things that he brings from a schematic point of view? So that's where I'm most interested. I thought the Illinois coordinators were incredible last week against Nebraska. I thought Barry Lunny was incredible, and I thought Aaron Henry was incredible. But this will be the biggest test for Aaron Henry. Not the Kansas game, nothing against Kansas. It's Andy Kotelnicki's offense and Penn State.
Dave, I'm with you. And I think to your point about what Aaron Henry said, I don't know that there's a bigger compliment that you can give another coach than when he talked about how much Andy Kotelnicki has impacted him. Obviously, when he was at OC at Kansas last season and they played each other. And you said it, like Aaron Henry watched that game over 100 times in the offseason. And he said it made him literally change how he views defensive play because of how Andy Kotelnicki does things on offense. So he will be dialed in, and I agree. I think this is going to be a huge measuring stick for exactly where Illinois is. Even though we've seen them go out and win some big games, this is going to be a different environment.
Well, they are one of the biggest surprises in the conference. Maybe the biggest surprise, though, is Indiana, certainly just in terms of the way that they have played. And that gets us to our big stat. It's brought to you by Hardee's, where there is good in the making every day from sunrise to supper time. We focus on the amazing start for the Hoosiers under Curt Cignetti. 202 points through 4 games, most to start a season in school history. In fact, it's the most points in any 4-game stretch ever for Indiana. And as we have firmly established, you and I, Ashley, ever is a long time. It's a long time. And of course, we're going to have that game, Maryland and Indiana, here on the Big Ten Network. You see coverage starting at 10 a.m. Eastern time with Big Ten Tailgate, leading you up to the game at noon Eastern between the Terps and the Hoosiers. And Cignetti has pointed out, he said this after the Charlotte game, hey, I understand it's the most points that Indiana's ever scored in 4 games, but let's be honest, the schedule hasn't been the greatest. And his story definitely checks out. The 4 teams they played are combined 3-11. But they've been crushing people, Ashley. I mean, it's not like they're just eking out victories against these teams. They are destroying people. So how sold are you on the Hoosiers?
Yeah, I think again, we're going to find out more this weekend, but I'm feeling good about the Hoosiers. I'll tell you what, I think a measure of a good team is one that does not play down to the level of their own competition. And Indiana, to your point, they have not done this. I'll be honest, when the schedule came out, Dave, I didn't exactly have this one like immediately circled as a game that I was going to be absolutely interested in and dialed in as I am right now. But here we are. And Indiana, they're undefeated. They're playing phenomenally well. They've just got this new sense of confidence that I imagine comes from their head coach and Curt Cignetti. And Maryland is a play or 2 away from being undefeated as well. They lost to Michigan State on a last-second field goal. So now we get to find out more. I think both quarterbacks, Billy Edwards and Curtis Rourke, have been terrific. So excited to see how they perform as we get into the meat of conference play. And I was going to save this for one of my questions at the end. But, Dave, I'm curious for you. Like, what do you think Ty Felton has to do to get more national attention for the way he's playing? I mean, maybe it's just to keep doing the thing that he's doing against Big Ten teams. But I love this young man's story. Under-recruited out of high school because of an injury. He stays loyal to Maryland. And in his 4th year, he's just tearing it up. And when you look at his stats, the thing that I love the most, he is leading all of FBS wide receivers in yards after catch and yards after contact. So not only is he making those catches, but he is squeezing every single ounce out of every play. I am officially in the Ty Felton fan club, and he's going to be squarely in the running for the Blitnikoff and a lot more awards if he keeps it rolling.
I agree. I think that recognition will start to come. I think it's begun. He's begun to get noticed here a little bit. Certainly in Big Ten country, people are talking about him quite a bit. But I think it plays into your point a little bit is, can you continue to do this against Big Ten opposition? Obviously, he did have a really nice game against Michigan State, but that's really the big question for Maryland. I mean, that's where I'm so interested in Maryland, right? I mean, the disparity between what they do in the non-conference and what they do in conference play is striking. And as much as we're wondering how good Indiana's going to be and whether or not they're able to continue this kind of performance as the Big Ten schedule ramps up, to me, the same question is true of Maryland. We've already seen them play one Big Ten game. And as you said, it was nip and tuck. It could have gone either way, but Michigan State beat them. And this has been a theme under Mike Locksley. They're 14-28 in conference play under Locks. They're 17-1 in non-conference. And they have beaten some pretty good teams in non-conference. So it's not like, well, they just schedule down and they don't beat anyone. That's not the case. The issue has just been, for whatever reason, they haven't been able to kind of follow through in those games. And Mike Loxley's talked a lot about mindset this week, about not panicking when things get tough in a game. And he was really impressed with what they did against Virginia, that they were down early against Virginia and that they didn't panic. And Virginia is a team not unlike the quality of some teams in the Big Ten. So can you do that against teams in your league? And by extension, can Ty Felton do that continually as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I'd be curious. I know we need to move on soon, but just a thought from you, having covered this team. Billy Edwards, when we coming into the season, I didn't really know what to expect. He's named the starter. We know that he can run, but I feel like the way he has been throwing the ball so far this season has been a little bit of a revelation, at least to me. You've been more dialed in on this team and you know him better. What have you made of the way that Edwards has started the season?
Huge revelation, no doubt. I guess when I saw that they had signed MJ Morris, I thought MJ Morris would probably be their starting quarterback, because Edwards has shown us to be a really good runner in past years and an okay passer. But Mike Loxley's so complimentary of the time that he has spent in the facility, of how respected he is among the guys, that the players have looked to him for leadership for quite some time. And it's one of those testaments to patience. We've talked a lot about Miller Moss. I think Billy Edwards is the same way. You are behind a historic record-setting quarterback. He'd already transferred once from Wake Forest, and rather than look for his next landing spot, he stuck around, he got better, he got to the point where he knew their playbook inside and out, and when the opportunity came, he seized it. It's really been one of the better stories in the Big Ten. Well, Indiana has, of course, been a great story, and they're not the only great story in the state of Indiana. There's a WNBA team that's done pretty well as well. Indiana Fever and their rookie Caitlin Clark. Perhaps you've heard of her. Named the WNBA Rookie of the Year yesterday in unanimous fashion. Former National Player of the Year at Iowa. Picked up right where she left off in Iowa City. She led the WNBA in assists and made threes. In fact, she's the league's single-season assist record holder. Fever trying to stave off playoff elimination tonight as they will take on Connecticut. Speaking of tonight, a can't-miss volleyball doubleheader on our airwaves. First, Penn State clashing with Purdue in a top 10 showdown. Then Wisconsin and Minnesota meet in a rivalry matchup. Coverage begins at 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Volleyball 10-1. They're ranked second in the nation heading into their conference opener Friday night against UCLA. Those 10 wins include 5 against ranked teams. You just saw a few of them this past week, especially impressive as they swept number 2 Stanford. First ever home win over the Cardinal in 4 tries, then went on the road and swept number 4 Louisville. One of the stars of that team, All-American Merritt Beason, joining us now for our big interview. Merritt, not just beating 2 top 5 opponents in 1 week, but sweeping them. What does that say about where your team is right now?
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, we got tested really early on in the season at SMU. And so for us, it was all about how we were going to respond. And I think those 2 matches were a chance for us to be tested once again. And I think this team has been working really, really hard, obviously on the court, but also off the court to make sure we're being what each other need and just being great teammates. And I think that you really saw that in those 2 matches. It's
interesting you brought up that SMU match, and that really was a shocking loss. It was the first time that Nebraska had lost to an unranked team since 2017. You got swept. Obviously, you guys have responded extremely well since then. What was the discussion? What did that match mean to what has happened subsequent to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly for us, it was obviously we never want to lose, but I think for us it was really good, and it was a wake-up call for us, like, hey, we aren't going to go in here and just roll all these teams, and we can't take ourselves too seriously. And so I think for us it was really, really good for us to be tested so early on. And afterwards, like I mentioned, it was just more things off the court, going back to building those relationships, which were so strong last year and a really big focus for us last year. And so it was more of just like teammateship, focusing on relationships, being there for one another, more of the things that you can do off the court necessarily than on the court, which is ultimately going to help us on the court in the long run.
It is interesting because you mentioned kind of this group of young women, and you guys are all so close, particularly because you essentially brought back everyone from the team last year. You were national runners-up. You didn't have a single senior on that roster. And so what is kind of is there, I don't want to use the word complacency, but is there just kind of an expectation that when you're largely familiar with one another, I know you have a few new faces, and you had so much success a year ago that some of that stuff is just maybe going to come automatically?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I think also, like you said, the additions that we added to our team are also great volleyball players. And we know how good of volleyball players we are. But at the end of the day, like if we're not on, like other teams are going to beat us. So I think for us, it's just focusing on what the task in front of us is, who we have that day, what game is that day or that week, and focusing on that one win, not looking too far forward, and which is pretty easy to do when we did have so much success last year. Obviously, we all want to redeem ourselves from the national championship last year. So it's more of just focusing on the task in front of us and not looking too far ahead of like, oh, like we want to win a championship this year, or, oh, we want redemption for how last year ended. So I think that's more of it's not necessarily complacency, just staying focused on the task at hand in the game in front of us.
You talk about some of the additions, the highest profile one, I suppose, certainly in terms of the names that Big Ten fans would be familiar with, is Taylor Landfair. She's a former Big Ten Player of the Year. She joins your team. And I mentioned you guys had so many players back. What's the challenge of integrating new players and kind of figuring out the balancing act in that lineup and where everyone fits in?
Yeah, I mean, we have 14 puzzle pieces and we have to figure out what and how they all fit together. And so, I mean, for us, it's just obviously showing her the ropes of like what the program is, what's expected of her, things like that. Whenever you transfer in, you kind of have to relearn everything like you're a freshman again. And she's having to adjust to how we play and how our coaches coach us and how they want us to do certain things. And so she's adjusting to all of that, like the other transfer and the freshmen. And so they're all kind of going through that together. But I think at the end of the day, like, it's a great thing. Our gym is so competitive day in and day out. We joke all the time that sometimes our practices are harder than matches that we play because it is so competitive in our gym. And at any certain time, anybody that's on the bench or maybe hasn't been playing can come in and take over a match. And each and every one of us and all of our coaches have full trust in that just because we are so deep and our gym is so competitive.
You mentioned her transferring in and transfers needing to kind of learn how a particular program does things. You obviously speak about that from a position of experience. You transferred in from Florida. To what extent have you been able to help both of the transfers this year in terms of acclimating and maybe in terms of helping them based on the experiences that you yourself had transferring into this program?
Yeah, for sure. It's huge. I mean, I'm the only other transfer in the program right now, so I'm really the only person that can relate to them in that aspect. And so I've just tried to really make sure they're okay, ask what they need of them, and just kind of, like you said, relate with them. And I think that's huge when you're transferring in. It's, like I said, you're having to learn everything over. You feel like a freshman again, and it's weird because you're like 21 and you feel like you're the newbie again. So it's a very, very weird thing. And so I've just tried to be there for them as best I can. And like you said, just relate to them and give them some advice that I learned along the way.
I want to get into your background just a little bit. It's pretty interesting. You're from outside of Birmingham, Alabama, of a small town. I know you started playing volleyball in 6th grade. You were an athlete in a bunch of other sports. What was it about volleyball that really appealed to you?
Yeah, well, I was a gymnast my whole life before, and so volleyball was kind of a culture shock for me because it was a team sport, and I went from having to be a perfectionist and shoot for a 10 all the time to you're playing a game where you only score making mistakes. So I think that switch up was kind of fun for me, and it pushed me in ways that I had not been pushed in athletics before, and so I liked that challenge. But I would say the main thing for me is just the team aspect of it and just finding girls that I love and loved playing with and loved going through the grind with was huge for me. And I really found that in club and then obviously through school ball once I got older. And so for me, that was huge. And that's what continues to drive me to this day is my teammates.
You did take to it relatively quickly. You started playing in 6th grade. You got a scholarship offer in 8th grade. Initially went to Florida before coming to Nebraska. To what extent was Nebraska initially involved in your recruitment?
Not at all. They didn't even send me a camp invite. So I give Coach and Jalen a hard time all the time. But no, not at all. like I said, never got a questionnaire or anything. And so they weren't even really on the radar for me. And even going into the portal, that wasn't someone that was on my radar. I knew that they had 2 girls my age in my position. So I was like, yeah, they probably don't want a third in my position. But so it was never really on the radar for me. But sometimes those are the best things and they work out the best way, the ones that you don't see coming.
Right. What ultimately made it the right place? Because you ended up committing pretty quickly once you went into the portal to Nebraska.
Yes, I did. I was here probably 3-4 days, I want to say, after I was entered into the portal, and committed like a week later. I knew pretty quick and pretty early on that this was the place for me and that this was where I wanted to call home.
It's interesting to me that you also played beach volleyball for Nebraska, and Nebraska is somewhat unusual among beach volleyball programs in that the indoor players also play beach. How does that help you? Like, it's obviously a very different game. What are aspects of that game, though, that perhaps can carry over to playing indoor?
Yeah, well, there's only 2 of us out there, so you're having to touch the ball in every single rally, every single play. And so I think, like, for liberos, they have to hit in beach, and middles have to pass, and I have to set. And so we're put in positions where necessarily indoor we're not always in. Sure, I might set a ball every once in a while, but I'm not setting on a day-to-day basis. And so for us, we're having to do things inside the game of volleyball that we're not normally used to. And then also, since there's only 2 of us, it really focuses on how you are as a teammate and how you're going to build that relationship with that one girl, because it's only you and her out there. There's no subs. If it's going poorly, you 2 have to figure it out together. And a lot of times there's not even a coach on your court. And so it pushes us in a lot of ways that indoor necessarily doesn't, but it also allows us to continue training and take a little bit off of our bodies and just be tested in a bunch of ways that indoor doesn't necessarily test us in.
How would you compare your enjoyment level of the 2?
I love them both. I mean, they're so different.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're both, but they're so different. I love the sun and being outside, though. So I love playing beach because we get to go to places like California and Hawaii and enjoy the warm weather, which I love. But also, like, nothing beats playing indoor with my team of 14 girls.
And obviously the crowd in indoor is
Yes.
pretty exciting, and I know you guys feed off that
Yeah.
quite a bit. Hey, I know you already have your degree. I don't want to look
Yeah, so I always wanted to be an elementary school teacher ever since I was in like 2nd grade. That's what I thought I was going to do, and that's what I got my degree for. But I'm really thinking that I might go back home to Alabama and open a volleyball club once I'm done playing. But who knows? I'm taking it one step at a time. I'm going to obviously focus on this year first and then having a professional career after. But that's what I'm thinking.
All right, well, let's go from the long term to the immediate term. I'm sorry I took you so far down that road.
No,
you mentioned looking ahead to this season and to your future in volleyball. Let's talk about this matchup coming up this weekend. You've got UCLA and USC coming up this weekend. Give us the scouting reports on those 2.
I can't give that away quite yet, but I know for us, it's just going to be continuing to focus on our side of the net and just do what we've been doing. And obviously, we're pretty familiar with some of the girls on USC, so we'll be excited to have Allie back in Nebraska. And I'm sure a lot of us are looking forward to seeing her, and it'll be a weird experience playing against her instead of with her. But I know we're really looking forward to it. But like I said, it'll just be focusing on our side of the net and doing what we need to do.
Well, we are looking forward to it as well. Merritt, Beason, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Really a pleasure to get to know you a little bit.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, best of luck. So that is the Scarlet Knight story, Ashley. What interests you the most about Washington heading into this one?
Yeah, there's a lot, Dave. I think for the fact that this is the first true road game for Jedd Fish and the Huskies, and yet it is a homecoming for Fish. He's a Jersey guy. Grew up about an hour away from Piscataway. His mom still lives there, so he'll have a bunch of friends and family at the game. But I'm interested to see, and I think it'll be good to see how Washington looks in this environment, because it's a big game. It's a night game. You mentioned the blackout. You'll have more eyes on you because it's Friday night on Fox. Jedd Fish was asked specifically about Kyle Monangai, the Rutgers running back, and the challenge that he presents. And his take was that, hey, our defense is well prepared to take on their running backs because we've been going against Jonah Coleman and a great stable of players every day in practice. And I think for the Huskies, And Dave, this is true for every team, but you just heard Jerry talk about Rutgers evolving. It's about how much can you grow and learn and evolve each week during the season, because during fall camp, we talked a ton about the 60 new faces in Seattle. And so now you've got 4 games under your belt. Coaches have a better sense of who these players are when the lights actually go on. But to me, like, the real measure of success is how much you can improve each week and make new mistakes, not the same ones over and over again. So that's what I'm interested in. What about you?
I'm with you. I think that Washington's defense is a huge story that maybe we haven't talked a ton about. But Jedd Fisch, his reputation is as an offensive coach. That's where he's had a ton of success on that side of the ball. But, man, he made an unbelievable defensive coordinator hire, at least early on here, in Steve Belichick. And you were talking about all the new faces. And that's what's so amazing to me here is that Washington has played as well as they have, given up 41 points here in 4 games. And they've done it with zero continuity. I mean, not only are all the players new, essentially, you have very few carryovers from that team last year, but even the guys who would be familiar with one another on that side of the ball, they didn't know the scheme. So, I mean, Steve Belichick had to come in, he had to teach them this scheme, he had to get everyone on the same page, and to do it as quickly as he has done it, that's what really jumps out to me. I mean, I expect them, look, they're a big play offense. They got more plays at 20 yards or longer than any team in the Big Ten. I expected that out of Washington, and I think it's going to be a big challenge for Rutgers, because as good as they've been defensively, they got gashed a few times early on here. They have to prevent those big plays. But to me, the big thing that has stood out has been that Washington defense.
I'm with you. And I think it's interesting when you think about Steve Belichick, and we could probably do I'd like to see an urban analysis on Steve Belichick, because this is the guy who spent his entire career up to this point in the NFL and with one team, the New England Patriots. So he's learning as well the nuances of college, which is very different. The schedules are different, what you can ask of these guys, what your players all know. So not only is he getting to know his players and his personnel, but he's learning how to be a college defensive coordinator. So early returns are that was a terrific hire for Jedd Fisch. And, you know, I'm excited to see this one. I think Rutgers, you want to talk about Rutgers fans, they're excited about the team that they have this year. They nearly blew it against Virginia Tech, but dug in and got it done on Saturday. First ever win at Lane Stadium. And now they're 3-0 headed into league play. So if you peek ahead at their schedule, after Washington, Rutgers goes to Nebraska, and maybe the only other games, Dave, that they won't be favored in the rest of the way are at USC, and depending on how things go, home against Illinois in late November. So they don't have to play Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, or Penn State. So a favorable schedule for Greg Schiano, and obviously they can't do what we are doing right now, which is look ahead, because it all starts with taking care of business at home on Friday against the Huskies. But plenty more to come here.
Back to football, and we mentioned we're diving headlong into conference play this week. Some teams have already played one conference game. But either way, I think you're at the point, Ashley, where you kind of know who you are at this point in the season. Yeah. And so we're going to call this the wish list here. If there was one thing that a team wishes that it had or will try to accomplish as the year goes forward, maybe to add to its repertoire, what would that be? And let's start here with USC. I mean, I think the obvious one would be a do-over against Michigan. But aside from that, what's on the Trojans' wish list?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how powerful our magic wand
yeah,
is
exactly.
here. But
right.
I think you know, in addition to having some health, Lake McCree and Mekhi Lemon getting them back and healthy, I would say my wish for USC is improvement on the offensive line. And that Michigan game showed that unit is going to need to get better for the Trojans to accomplish what they plan to accomplish in the Big Ten. Now, they won't be going against Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant every Saturday, but yeah, I'd say O-line play. That's the area, if you could wave a magic wand and have instant cohesion and elevated play, I think that'd be it. How about you? I'm
with you. I might say both lines of scrimmage, although I will say this. The game was not a line of scrimmage mismatch, even though it was decided on the line of scrimmage. It was just a few big runs that Michigan had, and part of that was just tackling for USC as much as it was defensive line, because I think they had some guys in position and just didn't make the play. And then there were some plays, obviously, where Miller Moss was under duress, to your point, on the offensive line, and probably the line wasn't quite good enough, but they blocked the run game really well at points. Woody Marks had a very nice game. I don't think it's that far away, but I would tend to agree with your assessment. What about the other side of that game? I mean, I look at Michigan. Is it as simple as just saying they wish they had a better pass game, or is there more to it than that?
I think it's kind of as simple as that. And obviously it's never as simple as that. But if there was one thing you were going to wish for, they didn't need it against USC. 32 passing yards was enough to get it done against the Trojans, which is like still remarkable when you say it out loud. So they can win plenty of games running the ball and playing terrific defense. But to beat Oregon and Ohio State, they need to have at least the threat of a passing game. I do think having Colston Loveland back in the mix will help that. Hope that we get to see him against Minnesota this weekend. But Dave, I do. I think it's as simple as that.
I would agree with you. I think teams get better. Like their offensive line has gotten better. I might have said coming out of week one with Michigan, maybe you would have said, man, I wish their offensive line were better than it is. And I think it's pretty darn good after watching that game against USC. But I do think, and Sharon Moore said this week, there is more that we can add to the pass game. One would hope so, to your point. Again, you throw for 32 yards in a game, you got to figure there's more that you can add to the pass game. But it does seem pretty clear-cut that that's where it has to go. What about Oregon? I mean, I would say a couple weeks ago we would have said about Oregon, same thing, offensive line. Can they get better on the offensive line? And then they went against Oregon State, and not only was the O-line good, I mean, they did everything well, right? They never punted in the game. For all intents and purposes, they scored on every drive. There were a couple of drives where they weren't attempting to score at the end of halves, but other than that, it was pretty much the perfect performance. So what's the next thing for Oregon? What's still on that wish list?
I think it's to your point, Dave. It's like the consistency, playing with consistency and urgency, because when Oregon plays clean, they can hang with anybody. They have the talent. They have the coaching. We saw the team that we expected, to show up at Oregon State a couple weeks ago. So from the Ducks' perspective, the wish and the hope is that coming off the bye week, they come out sharp, focused, and they've got UCLA this weekend, a program obviously they're very familiar with. We might see Dante Moore, the quarterback, playing against his former team. But to me, it's about the consistency and urgency and keeping that level of play all the way through every single game, even when, again, playing to your level of competition.
And I think the defense probably could take another step, too. It's kind of middle of the pack defense in the Big Ten right now. And so are they at that level that we saw last year where they really were one of the top defenses, certainly in the Pac-12, and one of the better defenses in the country? To me, maybe there's a little bit of a step to be taken there. And obviously they're trying to compete with the very top of this league that includes Ohio State. I don't know. This is kind of like the old eternal question. What do you give to the person who has everything? Right? Like, what's the right gift for Ohio State? Is there something here that you would put on the Buckeyes wish list?
Yeah, it is. You're spot on. I mean, it's hard because they have an embarrassment of riches in Columbus. I think every fan base in America would love to have what Ohio State has. So the wish for the Buckeyes, maybe it's as simple as that. It's just health the rest of the way. This program has everything it needs and more to go win a national title, as long as they stay healthy at key positions, especially at quarterback. I will say I texted a couple of my diehard Buckeye friends and I said, what's on your wish list? Like, what's the thing that you most want? And two of them responded right away that they want to beat Oregon, which, so I guess put that on the wish list. Obviously, a win over Oregon would be nice and is top of mind for Buckeye fans. I assume that's because a win against Michigan that's obviously always the number one thing.
Yes.
But I thought that was interesting.
I thought it was interesting this week. Ryan Day said there's nothing that we feel good about. I mean, it feels like, to me, you could feel good about a few things, right? Given how well they play. You can let down your guard just a little bit. One thing I would say, I think, and they've taken care of this going forward, they got Texas the next 2 years and Alabama after that. But I don't think the schedule did them a whole lot of good. Like, I think they could have wished for better competition. I think we both agree. Like, they're really, really good. But I'm not sure, like, if there are weaknesses there, I'm not sure this schedule gave them a chance to address them. First of all, to expose them, and second of all, to address them. And so maybe in hindsight, you wish for a better schedule. And again, that's not going to be an issue going forward. Like, you'll learn a lot about your team next year against Texas. The dramatic wrapping things up here on Big Ten Today. Dave Revson back with Ashley Adamson. And Ashley, this is a segment that we introduced last week. It was your brainchild. 4 things that we are looking for. I think we narrowed it down from 6 to 4 because we're so long-winded. But 4 things we're looking forward to this weekend. Why don't you lead us off? What's the first one for you?
We were told we couldn't do 6. We got to get the 2-minute tempo down.
If they were down to 2 next
with
week, then we really have problems. Yeah.
Exactly. They're not going to bring me back for the last segment anymore. I am looking at the 2 young quarterbacks who both had heartbreaking losses last weekend. Nebraska's Dylan Raiola and Aiden Childs at Michigan State, and not comparing them as players, but and they will both, by the way, have different level of challenges this weekend. But as they get to make their 5th collegiate starts this weekend, what have they learned? Sometimes I think a loss can teach you more than a win because the mistakes hurt more when it's a loss. So interested to see how Raiola looks against Purdue. And Childs, boy, he is about to experience something that no trip to BC or Maryland could prepare you for, which is playing at the Horseshoe. That is a rough place to go clean up mistakes and get back on track. So how about you, Dave?
As you look to build confidence, why don't you do it against Ohio State?
Yeah.
It's interesting. And Raiola, I do think, like the way that Purdue has struggled against the run, maybe less pressure on Raiola. Maybe Nebraska's able to lean on the run a little bit. I'm really interested in Indiana, Maryland. We've talked about this game a little bit. I want to preface this by saying I think Maryland's a good team, and I don't think that this game is going to be a mismatch. However, what if it is a mismatch? And what if Indiana annihilates Maryland in the way that they have annihilated other teams? Again, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen, but I'm saying, what if it does? Like, then what are we dealing with Indiana here, Ashley? Do we have to start thinking about Indiana in the same way that we thought about the one Indiana team that's ever made it to the Rose Bowl in the late 60s, where they had won 1 game the year before, and the next year they were in the Rose Bowl? Like, how good is Indiana? I think we're going to start to find out even more this weekend.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And I really think it's like every weekend, I feel like we're saying the same thing. We're going to find out more about this team. We're going to find out more about this team. But that is the case as you go through the course of the season and really when you ramp up Big Ten play. So we are going to be, Kurt Signetti t-shirts will be everywhere in Big Ten country if they keep this thing rolling. I'd say the next thing I'm interested in is the Wisconsin-USC game. Of course, how do the Trojans bounce back after a heartbreaker in Ann Arbor? I want to see that. But for Wisconsin, the burning question is, what does this offense look like now that Braden Locke has taken over for Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback? The best coaches we know, Dave, are the ones who can craft their game plan and scheme around what their players do best. So curious to see what Phil Longo does against a Trojan defense that is vastly improved under D'Anton Lynn, and we'll be feeling pretty salty coming off that Michigan loss.
I agree with you. Obviously, the quarterback change puts this into more of a heightened perspective, but I just think in general, who is Wisconsin offensively? I think we still haven't totally seen an identity here with this air raid. They've only scored more than 30 points once in the last 12 games, so can they figure it out now with a new quarterback? And then the last thing for me, Ashley, is the coordinator matchup in that Rutgers against Washington game. We've kind of already talked about it, but Kirk Ciarrocca, Steve Belichick, X's and O's. I'm really fascinated to see who gets the upper hand there.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And I should also make one correction. I know I said that Michigan State, they're at home against Ohio State. So Aiden Childs is going to be fine. No problem against the Buckeyes.
Yeah, no problem against Ohio State.
He's
right?
got
Just
this one.
You got the friendly environment around you. Anyway, great stuff. Ashley, really enjoyed this as always, and we will talk to you again next week. Have a great one, my friend. Actually, see you on Saturday. Take care.